Good morning. Let us start the discussion on 07 January 2016 newspaper. The first article is related to Nepal crisis, the way forward. The Nepal logjam, which was after the launch of their own constitution, still continues. The blockade of the supply of goods and services to the Nepal and violence in the Madheshi dominated areas that still continues. But recently, all party meet involving the opposition government and the Madhesis. The government announced for a 3-point formula to solve the ongoing Nepali crisis. It majorly focuses on reorganization of provinces. The Madhesis demand for reorganization of the political boundaries of the provinces so that Madhesis can remain as a majority in the provinces, especially in the plains. So they don't want to have plain plus the hill mix of provinces. So they want to have 5 provinces where they can absolutely enjoy their majority so that their voice can be heard more in these provinces. So what this 3-point formula says is the reorganization of provinces will happen within 3 months on the basis of consensus through political mechanisms. Within 3 months on the basis of consensus through political mechanism. And next is the participation in state organs. It means that with regard to the bureaucracy and also various constitutional positions, there has to be a proportional representation for the Madhesis. This is what is the demand is. So in this case, it was almost agreed for this, and electoral constituencies will also be demarcated based on the proportion of the population. Previous electoral constituencies were relatively less in number for the Madhesis compared to their population. Now this is going to be rectified. Finally, the citizenship rights were restricted to Madhesis. What it says is, if a woman marries outside the country, the offspring of her will not enjoy the right to occupy the constitutional offices in Nepal. So these 3 things will be addressed in the ongoing Nepal problem, the 3-point formula. What was the India's reaction to this? India has welcomed this particular step as positive, and it also said the inclusiveness of all the communities is the only way forward. So in this context, if you can see the existing regime in the Nepal, it is using its anti-Indian card and also the pro-China card to raise their Nepali nationalistic sentiments. So anti-Indianism is becoming a tool to cover up its failures in Nepal. So in this context, India has to be very cautious to protect its important neighbor with whom it has a free boundary, or there are people can move freely between India and Nepal without any restrictions. And added to this, the growth of violence in the Madhesi areas can have the spillover effects into the India. And most of the Madhesis have cultural and matrimonial relationships with the Indians. They are going to create a huge impact on the bordering states such as Bihar. So in this context, India has to improve its constituency and trust with the Nepal people. And the political engagement, it has to become much deeper. So it's not only good for India in the long term, it's also very much necessary for the Prime Minister Modi and its neighborhood first policy. And coming to the West Asian crisis, now let us analyze something deep into this. Saudi Arabia played very tactically to infuse Iran and sentiments in Iran to delegitimize the ongoing integration of Iran into the global economy. Now let us see this way. Saudi Arabia is going through a deep economic crisis now. The fall in the commodity prices, it is fast decreasing the wealth of the Al Saud family, which owns most of the oil wealth in Saudi Arabia, who are the ruling monarchs. So previously, whenever there was a dissent, the king used to spend his money for welfare programs to reduce this dissent. In this context, that flexibility is dying down very soon for the existing King Salman. So, every time what a dictator does or what a monarchy does is to strengthen their majoritarian sectarianism to protect their constituency. So when the welfarism is not working, then the alternative to this is to raise the sentiments and majoritarian credentials or to resort to the extreme majoritarianism to protect the support for them. And by ordering for the execution of Nimr al-Nimr, the Saudi Arabia also wants to play an international card along with the domestic card. On domestic side, it wants to gain the supports of the Sunni dominant population. On the international side, it wants to get the support from all other Sunni dominated monarchs, which exactly has happened. When Nimr was executed, there is a reaction in the Iran where vandalization and destruction of the Saudi property in Iran and its embassy has led to a huge diplomatic crisis where Bahrain, it has disconnected its ties with the Iran, and also Saudi Arabia severed all diplomatic connections. Saudi Arabia sued on too. And finally, the UAE also downgraded its ties with the Iran. So, a diplomatic crisis is very much the advantage of the Saudi. And second thing is, let us see the global politics in the West Asia. Now, United States was a close ally of Saudi Arabia. I am using was a close ally. Now, because I don't know how these West Asian politics are going to change, because Iran and Saudi Arabia in the early days, 1950s, before the Iran revolution has come up, these are the two pillars of the American policy. So, in this context, now, the situation is fast changing. Iran nuclear deal was never expected by the Saudi Arabia to happen, and it wanted to derail the process and expose the Iran, because Iran's increasing economic strength and its legitimacy in the global politics will directly challenge the Saudi Arabia. So Yemen bombing and also supply of support to the Bahrain and giving money and other support to the opponents of the Assad regime in Syria, all these are the actions in support of that particular thing. So in this context, the Iran nuclear deal or passing or smooth conclusion of the Iran nuclear deal, it has really raised the tensions in the ruling Saudi Arabian family. So in this context, so again, reducing the space of Iran in the global politics is its agenda, which it accordingly played by exiting Nimr al-Nimr, and Iran directly played into the hands of Saudi Arabia by vandalizing the embassy. So in this context, the hardliners of Iran also not interested in the Iran nuclear deal. They also took as an opportunity against the Rouhani. So in this context, the immediate sufferer is the Syrian peace process. And also the instability in Iraq is going to be fueled very soon, because you know Iraq is a Shia dominated population, and after the Saddam's ouster, a Shia dominated ruling establishment was made, and the fight against Islamic State is going to slow down. So these all are going to create a new problems to the global community. Let us see how it evolves further. Censor and sensibility is the next article. In this, you can clearly see about the problems with regard to regulatory process in India. So most of the Western countries, in the United States of America, it was self-regulation or independent regulation which was working. But in India, we still have the governmental regulation. So the Sham-Benegal committee was appointed to look into the matters related to the rules that have to guide the certification process in film industry. In this context, the major problem in the film industry and artistic expression of in the films is the political interference. The CBFC members are political interference, and they are interested to serve their particular political party or ideology rather than giving an expression to the artists. are giving a impetus to the artistic expression. So you can see Pahlaj Nihlani, what exactly he did. So the appointment process of the members who consider the certification as equivalent to censorship has to be changed. We can move to the American process of self-regulation, where the film industry itself regulates the certification process. So this change has to come up. The Sham-Benegal committee, though it do not have under its references, rules of reference this particular issue, it also can go and recommend on this issue. And North Korea tests an hydrogen bomb. For me, it is not a very significant news. But what is important for me is, where did it get its technology from? So it is one of the hard roots or venomous roots of Pakistan's nuclear bomb. So the Libya, North Korea, Iran, all these are the Khan's network. From that perspective, I try to see this article, and also you can talk about the crisis in East Asia, and the China, who is a only ally of North Korea, what is its response? And I don't even think that that's a hydrogen bomb. So these are the things we need to focus on. And next, India to counter on non-issues at WTO talks. Understand here the language has changed. Previously we used the language new issues. Now we converted them into non-issues, issues of no relevance. So the non-issues, they include global value chains, the labor, and also issues related to e-commerce, etc. So the West wanted to push these issues in the WTO talks, but they are not in support or not in favor of the developing countries, such as special safeguard mechanisms or towards public stock holding and providing for food security to the people. They want to dump the Doha development agenda. Now India is going to oppose these non-issues by questioning their relevance, and also by saying that it lacks consensus among 162 members of the WTO. So the non-issues are going to take a back seat. But however, these non-issues are gaining the strength in the regional trading blocks, especially Trans-Pacific Partnership and Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and all these cases, these non-issues are in the primacy. So what India is going to push is the free trade in services. So they are talking about free trade in goods, but our advantage is free trade in services. If you observe the European Union and India Free Trade Agreement talks, these are blocked at the level of the services. India is stressing for the free movement of the people across the borders. So that is mode 4 services. So India has a unique advantage over it. As the surplus capital these Western countries are having, they want to move this surplus capital into the developing countries for the production gains. India wants to move its surplus human resources across the borders so that they can create the wealth in India back. So it is pushing for the services sector, which it has a unique strength. So this is what is the difference which we are talking about. So the TFA, Trade Facilitation Agreement in Services, is in India's interest. Now think different on infrastructure. Yesterday's video, if you see, I stressed on that whenever the economy is slowed down, the public sector has to take the responsibility to push the economy back on track. So in this context, the infrastructure spending always will be on the forefront. This year 1.25 lakh crore plus is spent on the infrastructure, especially roads and railways. But however, its real impact is not yet visible on the economy because of the lag effect. What is this lag effect? Because infrastructure projects, they have a wider duration, or long-term plans and long-term utilities. So the real impact of these projects will only be visible after a time. So, and this year, the budget is going to more focus on the rural infrastructure, where the private sector is never interested to go. So whenever there is a slow economy or growth rate is slowing down, generally government takes a lenience on its fiscal deficit and tries to spend the money towards creating durable infrastructure. or durable assets for the community. So, in this case, we can relax the fiscal deficit to an extent to provide our impetus to our infrastructure. But the major problem is with implementation. In the last government, it was the policy paralysis. Now the government appears to be pushing the infrastructure, but the project implementation suffers from the as fast as casual approach. So this casual approach has to be replaced through accountability and mechanisms to improve the effectiveness. So if you take project monitoring group, it was established in cabinet secretariat. It is no more heard now. Now if you talk about this Pragati, so the Prime Minister directly monitoring the progress of infrastructure projects and investments, it is also not very much visible. So in this context, more the stress has to be on effective policy implementation and strengthening the accountability on this front. Next, the MG Narega is facing the crunch. You know that MG Narega is a demand-driven scheme. It means more the people tries to take up the employment under MG Narega, more the funds shall be made available. So it means now 35,000 crores was allocated in budget. Now extra requirement, if it is can be necessary based on the situation in the rural India. Now the drought is everywhere. So in this case, the distressed employment, it is through MG Narega, and the stress on the MG Narega is bound to increase. So the government shall make its funds freely available to the only livelihood available on the rural front now. So lack of these funds is derailing the interest and also the MG Narega, which is a livelihood concern. World Bank also has given specific recommendations in this context. Now coming to closure of the public sector undertakings. Now what is the mechanism which is there in declaration of the bankruptcy and closure of a public sector undertaking? So try to go through that. So the bankruptcy amendment bill which is pending in the parliament, I have discussed already, try to go through this. And next is the deep state. It is called, military in Pakistan is called as a deep state. It has actively engaged a war against the terrorist elements in Pakistan, especially Waziristan related areas, after this school incident. Now, it was, our intelligence agency says that the military has explicitly said to the Prime Minister Sharif that it will not take any action against the militant groups working against India. So, added to that, the Pathankot operations, they pose new questions to India. That is, do we have a centralized command and control structure to manage the security situations? So, again, national security strategy and national security doctrine, these are very much necessary for India to bring in intersectoral coordination or interdepartmental or interministerial coordination to face these challenges. Yesterday's article talks about war room approach by Nirupama Rao for a close coordination in these situations. So we need to talk about that. That's again the stress on this particular article. Thank you very much. All the best.